Another Supreme Court justice is calling out Donald Trump and also has a stern warning to lawyers who are capitulating and kissing the ring. If you don't have courage, don't be a lawyer. This Supreme Court justice is telling lawyers, Harry Litman, at a banned organization meeting. Yep. So the Trump regime has banned the American Bar Association, the ABA, which the Trump regime claims is a radical leftist organization. That it is not. I can tell you as a lawyer, it's the least thing I would think in those terms at all. But because they promulgate ethics rules and it's a place where lawyers still care about the rule of law, Donald Trump hates the ABA. The DOJ has said no DOJ lawyers can ever show up at the ABA. So notably, Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor showed up at an ABA conference this past week, and she urged lawyers to stand up to Donald Trump and stand up to Donald Trump's attacks. Now, she didn't use Donald Trump's name, but just like we talked about last week with Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson at another legal gathering in Puerto Rico, it was very clear that the message was about Donald Trump, and the message was also about the big law firms who have kissed the ring. A lot of law firms, I should add, though, have not, are standing up for the rule of law and are increasingly becoming vocal, which actually has been good to see that happen over the past weeks, whether it's out of actual love of the law, which I think exists, or even selfishly seeing that some of these Trump bend the knee law firms are realizing how screwed they got. Lawyers are leaving. They're struggling to recruit law students to work for them. You know, I think we're seeing a shift there. We could talk about that as well, Harry, on this video. But Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor urged lawyers at this ABA conference to stand up. She goes, our job is to stand up for people who can't do it themselves. And our job is to be the champion of lost causes, she says. But right now, we can't lose the battles we are facing, and we need trained and passionate and committed lawyers to fight. And she said, if you don't have the courage to be a lawyer, then this might not be the profession for you. Lots of other professions out there, it's fine. But if you're not going to zealously stand up for the rule of law, sorry, not your profession. Now, as I mentioned, this follows Ketanji Brown Jackson's statements in Puerto Rico last week, where Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Jackson, said, across the nation, judges are facing increased threats of not only physical violence, but also professional retaliation just for doing our jobs. And she talked about lawyers needing to stand up for the rule of law and justices needing to be courageous during this time. Now, interestingly, even Chief Justice Roberts got in on the action a little bit in Buffalo, where he had a fireside chat where it's like, talk about not talking about the elephant in the room. I think the closest they came to the elephant's little prick on the elephant's tail could be this part right here. I'll show you this of Justice Roberts. Let's play it.
What do you think of these calls for impeachment of judges based on the decisions that they've made?
Well, I've already spoken to that, and you know, impeachment is not how you register disagreement with decisions.
That's what you're for, right? That's what you're there for.
That's what we're there for.
Yeah.
That's what we're here for, Harry. You know, I'm going to register. Harry, what do you make of it all, sir?
You didn't think that was bold and fiery enough?
Harry,
So on Roberts, when he said it the last time, Ben, and we talked about it, it really was extraordinary because it was right after the calls for him. It was on his own. You know, the court was behind. This was pretty mild stuff because he was already scheduled to do this so-called fireside chat. You could see his interlocutor was assuming that it was going to be okay and, you know, already covered territory, and he did. And the expression is pretty uncontroversial. You don't impeach judges because you disagree with their rulings. Sotomayor is another matter. That's really, I thought, a very kind of aggressive move. Yes, she's talking to the Bar Association, and yes, she's talking very strongly about Perkins Coie and law firms standing up, but she says quite clearly battles. She calls quite clearly for the legal profession to be standing up in this whole range battles that they're being called on to wage against Donald Trump. She will be sitting on these cases, and she is basically championing one side. I'm sure you will get recusal motions as a result. Let's leave that to the side and just say she sees this obviously as such an extraordinary moment and such a kind of clear moment. There's the Constitution and the rule of law on one side. There's, authoritarian sort of crap and whatever Donald Trump says on the other. So much so that she feels comfortable making clear what side she's on. But I guarantee you, the lawyers didn't escape notice. And there has been, you and I have talked about this as well, a really kind of encouraging movement of many lawyers trying to step up to do the right thing and defend the rule of law. The most recent, Judge Dugan, her arrest in Wisconsin, you saw she's got a whole legal team now working pro bono, including Paul Clement, the very eminent, respected conservative Republican lawyer. So you are seeing, and she's encouraging people to step up as a profession. But one of the things, I don't see how you interpret it otherwise, that she's saying is this is a terrible time with an attack and assault from the executive branch, meaning the patent lawlessness of the administration, and she's going to rule on many of these cases. So it really was, I thought, a unusual, and I think she thought terrible times call for aggressive measures, and that's just what she did. She knew it would be reported nationwide, and it was.
Harry, let's talk about the developments, though. Are people hearing these messages? Are they getting the word from the Supreme Court? It feels at least like from where you and I were reporting 4 weeks ago to where we are now. Yes, you have those firms that capitulated, but it feels a little bit like more firms, again, are growing a spine, or at least feeling more like they're comfortable to fight. And we've also seen firms, litigation shops that bent the knee. Their litigation departments are suffering. They're usually these hybrid corporate transactional and litigation. I mean, the one I think about right now is Venable. Microsoft fired them very publicly and hired Jenners and Brock, who didn't bend the knee, who's fighting Trump. I wouldn't want to hire a litigator who got out, who got played by Trump. It just feels super weak. So what do you make of it all?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there is a sort of shift in tide, and two things are happening. First, the capitulators are feeling the cost of it, including within the whole marketplace where they're getting trashed by colleagues and where students are not wanting to interview with them and that sort of thing. And they're learning, and they're going to continue to learn, it seems to me, that there's no deal making with Donald Trump. Right now, they're trying to say, oh, all we've said is we'll work on these causes as we define it. And I guess, again, you've already bent the knee. That knee's going to stay bent, and he's going to keep making demands. That's point one. And then point two, on the other side, it's been so emphatic. You saw and read Judge Howell's opinion in the Perkins Coie case. She absolutely eviscerated the administration and, stood up for these very basic values of the rule of law, not to mention 5 or 6 kind of constitutional violations. So, it's so clear that the people who are capitulating are doing it as just abandoning their extremely well established, and I think the courts will yet again reaffirm them, constitutional rights. So that together is, I think, helping to grow spines. On the other hand, you know this well, a lot of law firms, 500 law firms, my law firm has signed letters in support, but the really richest ones, there's some very noteworthy holdouts. And I think the dynamic there really has to do with individual rainmakers and people saying they'll take their big book of business and leave. In other words, the same kind of selfish dynamic that I think has driven, say, the Washington Post or the LA Times to play ball with Trump. So it's certainly not a rout at this point, but I agree with you that firms are more and more coming around to understand there's strong reason to fight and also some pretty good reason not to capitulate. And those two combine to make the Perkins Coie's of the world in better shape, I think, than both currently and history. History will record of the Paul Weisses of the world.
Look, you can't make a deal with Donald. That's the reality. Like I'm just saying, just from a practical standpoint, like let's say you want, I'm not saying you should, but just even assume you want to bend the knee and you're like, whatever, and you think you're going to do a deal that protects your deal makers. If you give Trump an inch, he takes your life. Like you can't give him anything.
If you don't give him an inch, right, he'll take whatever new term he wants. That's right.
The only way you can deal with him is to fight. And you may not want to do that, in which case we go back to where we started, as Justice Sotomayor said. Then don't do this. Like leave, hide, run away.
Yeah.
But don't use your magic powers, of being a good lawyer with that knowledge for the dark arts. You use them for good or step away. So it's a powerful message. Glad we could break it down. Everybody check out the Talking Feds YouTube, Talking Feds Substack, and the Talking Feds podcast. Subscribe now to all of them. It's where I get my legal news from. Harry, thanks so much.
Thank you, Ben.
Can't get enough Meidas? Check out the Meidas Plus Substack for ad-free articles, reports, podcasts, daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, and more. Sign up for free now at MeidasPlus.com.